He walked into that conference room carrying a manila folder and a gas station coffee with a cracked lid. No blazer, no assistant, no lanyard with an important title, just a single father who had dropped his son off at school 43 minutes earlier and still had a smear of grape jelly on his left sleeve from where the kid had grabbed him at the car door. They looked at him the way people look at something that doesn't belong. One board member actually leaned over and whispered something to the woman beside her, and the woman pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. By the time he left that room, he had torn a $48 million contract in half with his bare hands, and not one person sitting at that table understood what had just happened. But they would, every last one of them. If you already feel yourself leaning forward, stay, because the part that changes everything hasn't even started yet. Drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The alarm on Daniel Marsh's phone went off at 5:51 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to. He lay still for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling above his bed, the one that looked vaguely like the state of Michigan if you tilted your head just right. He had been meaning to fix that for 2 years. He hadn't. The November air had come in through the gap in the window frame above the radiator. He could hear the pipes clicking inside the walls, the neighbor's dog barking at a squirrel, or a ghost, or nothing at all. The low rumble of a garbage truck working its way down Birchwood Avenue. He silenced the alarm before it could wake Caleb. That was the first calculation of the day. There were always calculations which floorboards to avoid on the way to the bathroom, whether to run the cough maker before or after the shower so the smell wouldn't drift down the hall, how to close the refrigerator quietly enough that it wouldn't register. 6 years of raising a child alone had turned Daniel Marsh into a man who moved through the world like he was trying not to disturb the surface of it. He sat up slowly, rolled his neck, put his feet on the cold floor. The house was small, 2 bedrooms on the east side of Raleigh, North Carolina, tucked between a retired schoolteacher named Harriet who left baked goods on his porch twice a month without ever knocking, and a rotating group of college students who apparently believed Thursday was the weekend, 3 rooms downstairs. A kitchen with a cabinet that had been hanging slightly crooked since before his wife passed. He had never fixed it. Every time he looked at it, he thought of her reaching up on her toes trying to get the mugs down, telling him he had installed the shelves too high on purpose. He hadn't, but he had never corrected her either. He put on yesterday's jeans, a clean flannel shirt, and walked the hall past Caleb's room. The door was cracked the way it always was. He looked in out of habit. His son was asleep, with one arm thrown over his head, and the blanket pooled entirely around his ankles, leaving his torso exposed to the November cold like it was July, 8 years old, and already sleeping like a small disaster. Daniel went downstairs, started the coffee, and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. An email had arrived at 3:17 in the morning from a paralegal at Vantage Legal Partners named Christine Yee, who appeared to operate on a schedule that had nothing to do with daylight. Mr. Marsh, the complete document set has been uploaded, full package, 2,914 pages. Your review deadline is Monday, signing ceremony is Thursday. Board has been notified of your scope, standard compliance review, no advisory role. Please coordinate directly with Mr. Aldridge's office with questions. He read it twice, no advisory role. He understood what that meant. He was there to check boxes to confirm that the contract didn't contain anything so obviously flawed that it would embarrass someone in a courtroom later. He was the final formality before the ink dried, the last stop on the assembly line, not because his opinion mattered, but because his signature provided a layer of insulation. He poured his coffee and opened the first file. The job had come through his usual channel, a referral from a former colleague named Trevor Banks, who now ran a mid-size compliance firm in Durham and sent work to Daniel whenever something was too sensitive or too technical to handle internally. Trevor had called on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, while Daniel was standing in the school pickup line, listening to Caleb argue with another kid about whether dolphins could survive in rivers. "I've got something for you," Trevor said. "Big one. Pinnacle Coastal Group, you know them?" Daniel knew the name, Pinnacle Coastal Group, one of the fastest-growing private holding companies in the Southeast, the kind of operation that acquired struggling firms, restructured them, and resold them at 3 times the price. Careful, private, meticulous about its public image. I know of them, Daniel said. CEO is Vivian Ashworth, daughter of Charles Ashworth. Ring a bell? Vaguely, he built the company about 18 years ago. There was a financial scandal, something federal. About 10 or 11 years back, he stepped down, the company restructured. His daughter inherited what was left and rebuilt it. What's it worth now? Trevor paused. Let's just say north of $2 billion and leave it there. She's closing a logistics deal. $48 million, multi-year agreement with a company called Harborline Freight Solutions out of Savannah. Legal team has signed off. They want an independent compliance review before execution. That's you. Standard scope, 2 weeks. Full document access. You attend the signing Thursday as compliance signatory. Caleb had appeared at the car window, pressing his nose flat against the glass. Daniel unlocked it. Pay, he said. Trevor named a number. Daniel went quiet for a second. That's not standard scope money, Trevor. No, it isn't. What are you not telling me? A pause on the other end. Probably nothing. But the deal's been pushed through fast, faster than normal, and the man doing the pushing is the COO, a man named Brennan Aldridge. He's been with the company about 14 years. I just thought it might be worth having someone careful take a look. Caleb had already climbed into the back seat. Dad, can we get Wendy's? No, why not? Because it's 5:30 and you had a full lunch. I'm a growing boy, you're 8, exactly. Daniel had taken the job. That was 3 weeks ago. Now he sat at his kitchen table in the early November dark on his third coffee, surrounded by printed documents and coded tabs and 3 pages of handwritten notes in the cramped shorthand that his former supervisor at the FBI had once described as reading like a man trying to win an argument with himself. The first week was normal. Corporate language, liability clauses, the usual thicket of indemnification paragraphs designed to protect everybody from everything. While committing to nothing, he flagged a few small issues, received revisions within 48 hours, clean, professional, efficient. The second week was when things stopped being normal. It started with the ownership structure of Harborline Freight Solutions, on paper a straightforward logistics company. Registered in Delaware with offices in Savannah, 3 named executives, a functional website with photographs of shipping terminals, and smiling workers in hard hats. But when Daniel began pulling on the thread of the ownership chain, which was technically his job, though no one had expected him to pull very hard, he found something that didn't sit right. Harborline Freight Solutions was 73% owned by a holding company called Meridian Ridge Equity. Fine. Meridian Ridge Equity was incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Less fine, but not unusual. Meridian Ridge was itself owned by 2 entities, a trust called the Aldridge Family Trust, and a shell company called Tybee Shoreline Holdings, registered in the British Virgin Islands. He spent 2 days trying to find anything public about Tybee Shoreline Holdings. Almost nothing. A registration date, a registered agent address that turned out to be a law firm in Tortola that handled hundreds of entity registrations. One appearance in a financial database, buried in a footnote of an SEC compliance filing from 2018. But that footnote pointed to a name. The name connected to a company. The company connected to a federal investigation from 11 years ago, an investigation that had destroyed Charles Ashworth. Daniel sat back from his laptop. He checked his watch. It was 6:22 in the morning. He heard the familiar creak of the third step from the top. Caleb appeared at the bottom of the stairs in his pajamas, hair going in 4 directions at once, dragging a stuffed sea turtle by the leg. You didn't sleep, Caleb said. He said it the way someone much older would say it, with that particular flatness that came from long observation. I slept a little. Your eyes are red. I'm fine, bud. Can I have the dinosaur cereal? Yes. Caleb climbed up to his chair, looked at the stacks of paper across the table. Is that your job? Yeah. Is it boring? It was, Daniel said. It's getting less boring. The building was the kind that announced itself before you walked in. 37 floors of steel and tinted glass on Fayetteville Street in downtown Raleigh. A lobby with marble floors and a reception desk, staffed by 2 people who were very good at making you feel like a visitor rather than a person. Abdul had been coming here every day for 2 weeks. He had a temporary badge. He knew the security guard's name, Phil, who was originally from Buffalo, and had opinions about the bills that he shared freely. He knew which elevator was fastest, which conference room had the best connection, which floor had a coffee maker that wasn't broken. He had never met Vivian Ashworth. He had seen her 3 times, once in the lobby, moving fast on heels that hit the marble like punctuation, speaking into her phone in a voice that left no room for interruption. Once through the glass wall of her corner office on the 35th floor, sitting at a long table with 7 other people and a whiteboard covered in numbers, once in the elevator, where she had glanced at him, at his contractor badge, at his flannel shirt, and looked back at her phone. Not with contempt, with the practiced invisibility that powerful people develop for everyone who isn't currently relevant to them. He understood what he looked like from where she was standing: infrastructure, a signature waiting to happen. What he knew about her, he knew from public record, and what Trevor had mentioned over the years. Vivian Ashworth had graduated from UNC Chapel Hill at 20, and Georgetown Law at 24. She had worked for a financial consulting firm in Washington before coming back to Raleigh at 26, when her father's company was in pieces, and had bought the remaining assets with private investment and a degree of personal conviction that the business press had retroactively called visionary. She was 31 years old and had rebuilt a dead company with her own hands, and she was about to sign a contract that would deliver a very large piece of that company into someone else's pocket, whether she knew it or not. Daniel requested a meeting with Brennan Aldridge's office. On Monday morning, Aldridge was 58, silver-haired, and had the practiced ease of a man who had been liked by people he needed things from. For a very long time, he had joined Pinnacle Coastal 14 years ago and worked his way to CO through a reputation for deal-making and operational discipline. His assistant, a young man named Garrett, called back within the hour. "Mr. Aldridge is fully booked through Thursday." Garrett said, "The signing is Thursday." Daniel said, "Yes, that's why he's booked. I have questions about the ownership structure of Harbyline Freight Solutions that need to be addressed before Thursday." A pause. "I'll let him know you called." He never heard back. He tried twice more. Each time he received polite responses that said nothing and moved the timeline past the signing like a hand casually pushing something off a table. On Wednesday morning, he sent a formal written notice to the board's general counsel, a man named Douglas Pratt, outlining 3 specific concerns about the ownership chain of Harborline Freight Solutions. He stated the facts and asked for clarification. Pratt's office responded with a call from an associate, not Pratt himself, who told Daniel that his concerns had been reviewed, that the deal had been vetted by multiple parties, and that his role as compliance signatory was to confirm regulatory compliance, not to evaluate the strategic character of the transaction. That evening he made Caleb scrambled eggs with toast, because Wednesday was scrambled egg night, one of the small rituals they had built together over 6 years. And he sat at the table listening to Caleb talk about a kid at school who had brought a bearded dragon in his backpack. "Was the dragon okay?" Daniel asked. "Miss Fontaine took it. She kept it in a box in the supply closet." Caleb chewed. "Dad, you've got that face." "What face?" "The one where you figured something out, and you don't like what you figured out." Daniel looked at his son for a long moment. "How do you even know what that looks like?" "I live with you," Caleb said, and went back to his eggs. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Daniel arrived at 9. He had spent the night building a presentation, 44 slides, everything he had found, organized by date, by document, by financial trail, the shell companies, the ownership chain, the 2018 footnote, the federal case, the names that kept appearing where they shouldn't. He had also printed 6 hard copies, because sometimes the most important thing you can do is put paper in someone's hands. The boardroom was on the 34th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a view of downtown Raleigh that caught the November light in a way that made you want to believe in things. There were 12 people in the room when he arrived, 6 members of the Pinnacle Coastal Board, 2 executives from Harborline Freight Solutions in suits that fit the way suits fit when someone else pays for them, Christine Yee and 2 other members of the legal team, and Brennan Aldridge, standing near the window with one of the Harborline executives, talking in the low, comfortable register of men who already knew how this day was going to end. Aldridge looked up when Daniel walked in. Something crossed his face, not concern. Something more like the mild annoyance of a man who sees a wasp near his food and has not yet decided whether to deal with it. Then he looked back at his conversation. A few minutes later, Vivian Ashworth walked in. She moved the way she always moved, like the room had been arranged for her arrival, and she simply hadn't had time to acknowledge it yet. Dark blazer, dark slacks, hair back. She was finishing a phone call as she sat down at the head of the table with the kind of natural authority that doesn't get learned because it doesn't need to be. Her eyes swept the table. They stopped on Daniel. "You're the compliance reviewer." "Yes, Daniel Marsh. Everything clear to sign?" "No, that's actually what I need to talk to you about." The room went quiet. The way rooms go quiet when someone says something that wasn't in the program. Vivian tilted her head, "Mr. Marsh." Her voice was even, patient even. "My team tells me your concerns were reviewed and addressed." "Your team told you that?" "I'm telling you they weren't." Someone at the table actually laughed. One of the board members, a heavy man in a charcoal suit named Warren Finley, let out a short, dismissive sound like a cough. Brennan Aldridge turned fully toward Daniel. His expression was pleasant. That was the part that made Daniel's neck prickle. Men like Aldridge got dangerous when they got pleasant. "Mr. Marsh," Aldridge said, "I understand you've been thorough. That's exactly what we hired you to be. But the legal team has reviewed this contract inside and out." The legal team reviewed the contract for regulatory compliance. Daniel said, "They didn't look at the ownership structure of the counterparty. Nobody did, because nobody was asked to. You were asked to confirm. I was asked to conduct a compliance review. That's what I did." He looked directly at Vivian. "May I have 10 minutes? She looked at him for a long moment. The expression on her face was not dismissive. It was the expression of someone running the odds and not yet having landed on a number. "We're scheduled to sign at 10, she said. "I know. 10 minutes before that, then." Aldridge cut in smoothly. "Vivian, I really don't think it's productive to delay Gerald." She said it quietly, just his first name, and Aldridge went still. 10 minutes, she said to Daniel. "Make them count." He connected his laptop to the display. He had practiced this. He knew he had one shot, and he knew that most of in this room had already decided he was wrong. That was fine. He wasn't trying to convince most of the room. He was trying to convince one. Harborline Freight Solutions, he said. On paper, a logistics company based in Savannah, Georgia, 73% owned by Meridian Ridge Equity. A Cayman Islands holding company, Meridian Ridge is jointly owned by Aldridge Family Trust and Tybee Shoreline Holdings, incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. He advanced the slide. Tybee Shoreline Holdings has almost no public footprint. One registered agent in Tortola, one appearance in a financial database, a footnote in an SEC compliance document filed in 2018 by a company called Blue Star Capital Management. He advanced again. Blue Star Capital Management. You may not recognize that name. Here's why you should. The next slide showed a headline, 11 years old. Pinnacle Coastal Group founder steps down amid federal investigation. Charles Ashworth resigns. The room changed. Not loudly, but it changed. He felt it the way you feel weather before it arrives. He looked at Vivian. Her face had gone completely still. Blue Star Capital Management was one of the entities named in the federal investigation that preceded your father's resignation. The company was dissolved in 2012. Tybee Shoreline Holdings was registered in the British Virgin Islands in 2013. Different name, different registration, same registered agent office, same address. And one of the two officers listed on Tybee Shoreline's registration shares a surname with a former Blue Star Capital executive who was interviewed during the federal investigation and never charged. He set a printed copy of his notes on the table in front of Vivian. The ownership trail of the company you are about to pay, $48 million, runs through an entity that is connected, not conclusively but connected, to the same financial network that was investigated in connection with your father's case 11 years ago. The silence stretched. Then Warren Finley said, "This is circumstantial. You're connecting dots that, I'm showing you the dots exist. What you do with them is your decision." "You realize," Aldridge said, still smooth, still pleasant, "that delaying this deal has real consequences. We have partners committed. We have timelines, Mr. Aldridge." Daniel turned to him. "Your name doesn't appear in any of these documents. I want to be clear about that." He held Aldridge's gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "I'm just showing what I found." Something moved behind Aldridge's eyes. A small thing, but Daniel had been looking for it. "Miss Ashworth," he turned back to her, "the decision is yours. It always was. I'm the compliance reviewer. My job was to tell you what I found. I've done that." He paused. "I'll leave the room if you want to discuss privately." Vivian Ashworth had not moved. She was sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded in front of her, looking at the printed document he had placed there, and her expression was one Daniel recognized from an entirely different context. It was the expression of someone who had just heard something they already knew was true somewhere underneath everything. One of the Harborline executives broke the silence. "Ms. Ashworth, these are unfounded concerns from a— Can you confirm," she said quietly, "that this is everything you have, or is there more?" "There's more," he said it steadily. "I have a complete 44-slide presentation and approximately 400 pages of supporting documentation that I have been trying to get someone in this building to look at for 5 days." Warren Finley started to speak. Vivian cut him off. "Warren, stop." She looked at the Harborline executives. "Gentlemen, I need to ask you to step out." They exchanged a look. "Ms. Ashworth, we flew in from—" "I know where you flew in from. Someone will bring you coffee. I need the room, please." They left. She looked at Aldridge. Aldridge's pleasant expression had slipped, just slightly, into something more compressed. "Vivian," he started, "this is completely— I need you to step out too, Brennan." A beat. A long one. "Vivian." Just the name again. Different this time, harder underneath. He left. And then it was Daniel Marsh and Vivian Ashworth, and 6 board members in a room, with a $48 million contract sitting unsigned on the table between them, and through the windows the November skyline of Raleigh went on, without knowing or caring about any of it. "Start from the beginning," Vivian said. "All of it? All of it." He talked for 40 minutes, every slide, every document, every footnote, every shell company, every date, every connection. He presented only what he could demonstrate. He flagged the gaps. He marked clearly where the evidence was solid and where it was circumstantial. She asked questions, sharp, precise ones. The questions of someone who had spent years learning how financial structures could be used to conceal the truth. Because she had lived through a version of this before, and it had cost her everything. At no point did she look away. When he finished, the room was quiet. "Why didn't the legal team catch this?" she said. "Because nobody told them to look for it. They were reviewing the contract, not the counterparty's corporate history. Different assignment. Nobody assigned it." "Nobody assigned it," she repeated. Something in her voice had gone very quiet. "My father," she said, and then she stopped, and the sentence just sat there unfinished, and she looked at the window, and Daniel understood that some things don't have endings that anyone can speak out loud. "I don't know anything about your father's case beyond what's in the public record," he said. "I'm not drawing conclusions, I'm telling you what I found." She nodded slowly. "Who arranged your engagement on this review?" "Referral through Trevor Banks at Cornerstone Compliance Group." "I assumed it came through your legal department. I don't know a Trevor Banks." Daniel looked at her. "Then someone referred him to your team without your knowledge." "Or someone in my team arranged it," she said quietly. He didn't answer that. It wasn't his to answer. She looked at the contract on the table, the $48 million contract, in a neat stack with a pen beside it, and little colored flags on every signature line. Then she looked at Daniel. "You drove here today. You have no advisory authority. You have no stake in this company. Nobody in this building took you seriously for 2 weeks. So why?" He thought about it honestly. The way he thought about anything worth thinking about honestly. "Because I found something that mattered," he said. "And I don't know how to find something that matters and not say anything about it." She studied him. Not at his badge, not at the jelly stain on his sleeve, at him. Then she reached across the table and picked up the contract. What happened next was not something Daniel had planned. Later, he would try to explain it to Trevor and realize he couldn't, not fully, because the logic of it had been more physical than rational. Somewhere in the previous 40 minutes, he had reached a point where he could see clearly what would happen if he walked out of this room. Aldridge was still in the building. The Harborline executives were still in the building. There was momentum in this room that had nothing to do with evidence, and everything to do with schedule, and money, and everyone's investment in the day going exactly as planned. Vivian was smart. She was smarter than anyone in this building gave her credit for. But he had watched for years how information could be understood in one moment, and rationalized away in the next, how pressure could undo clarity, how the person with the most to lose was sometimes the last to reverse course. So when she lifted the contract and he saw something uncertain move across her face, something that might resolve itself wrong if no one did anything, he stood up. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He took the contract from her hands and he tore it in half. The sound of it in a silent room, 2 sheets separating against the grain, the sharp, clean sound of $48 million being put on hold. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room erupted. Warren Finley was on his feet. Someone was already on their phone. 2 board members were shouting at each other near the door. Someone called for security. Vivian Ashworth had gone completely still. She was looking at the 2 halves of the document in Daniel's hands. He set them on the table in front of her. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. That wasn't professional. He picked up his laptop, gathered his notes. "I'll send you the complete digital file before noon," he said. "Everything I have, all 400 pages." He looked at her directly. "The entity that controls the company you are about to pay $48 million to. I don't think this is the last place they were going to try to collect it from. I think you need to understand who you're actually dealing with before any of this goes further." He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Ms. Ashworth," she looked at him. "The deal your father walked away from 11 years ago, the investigation." The names in those OS documents, he paused. "I don't think it ended the way it was supposed to." He left before she could answer. He was in the elevator going down when his phone buzzed. A text from Caleb's school. "Hi, Mr. Marsh. Quick reminder that Caleb has soccer practice today at 3:45. Can you confirm pickup?" He typed back, "Confirmed. I'll be there." The elevator opened on the lobby. Phil at the security desk looked up as Daniel handed back his badge. "Done for the day?" "Done with this one," Daniel said. He walked out through the glass doors into the November air. The city was doing what cities do in the middle of a Thursday morning, indifferent, continuous, carrying on. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets. His heart was going faster than he wanted it to. He had just torn a $48 million contract in a room full of board members and walked out with no plan beyond sending the file. He started walking toward the parking garage. He had 4 hours before 3:45. Enough time to get home, let the dog out, eat something that wasn't gas station coffee. And then he was going to go through every document one more time. Because what he had found so far was never the whole story. It never was. The digital file from Daniel arrived at 11:53 that morning, 407 pages, organized by date, clearly labeled, with a cover memo that laid out his methodology in plain language and stated explicitly that the conclusions were circumstantial and would require additional investigation to confirm or refute. He had included his phone number at the bottom with a single line. "If you want to talk through any of this, I'm available." Vivian read the cover memo twice. Then she picked up her phone and called the number. It rang 4 times. She was preparing to leave a voicemail when he picked up, and in the background she could hear a child's voice saying something she couldn't quite make out. "Mr. Marsh," a brief pause. "Ms. Ashworth." She heard the background sound shift. He had moved to another room. "I got the file," she said. "Good. I also spoke with my father this morning." Silence on his end, waiting. "He told me who the COO was in 2011 and 2012. The person who managed the company's cooperation with the federal investigators." "I see. I don't think you do." She looked at the window. It was Brennan Aldridge. The silence that followed was different, longer. "That's not in anything I found," he said. "No, it's not in the public record. My father told me directly. Aldridge joined the company 6 months before my father resigned. The previous COO had been pushed out for health reasons. Aldridge came in and within 6 months was managing the federal response on behalf of the company." "Okay," he said, and she could hear him thinking, "Does Aldridge know you're looking at this?" "No, keep it that way. I'm already ahead of you on that, Mr. Marsh." She paused. "Before you were a compliance consultant, what did you do? Why? Because the way you organize those documents isn't how compliance reviewers organize documents. It's how investigators organize evidence. And you told my board this morning that nobody assigned you to look at the ownership chain. But you looked anyway. That suggests professional habit. Or I'm thorough." "You're more than thorough." She kept her voice even. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm trying to understand who I'm dealing with." A shorter pause this time. "I worked for the federal government for 7 years, he said. "Financial Crimes Division. I left in 2018. "Why?" "Personal reasons." She waited. "My wife got sick. She needed care, and then she needed more care, and then she died, and I had an 8-year-old and a job that required me to be somewhere else most of the time. And I made a choice." She hadn't expected that. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. It was a few years ago. His voice was matter-of-fact, not dismissive, just something that had been lived with long enough to be carried without collapsing. "What cases did you work?" "Various ones." There was a pause. "One of them touched some of the same financial networks as the 2011 Pinnacle Coastal investigation. I wasn't the lead. I was an analyst. The case was closed before it fully developed." "Why was it closed?" "Political pressure," he said. "These things happen. Powerful people have powerful friends. Sometimes an investigation ends before the truth does. But you kept what you found, some of it, what I was legally allowed to keep, which wasn't everything, but it was enough to recognize what I was looking at when I started digging into that ownership chain. Ms. Ashworth, will you let me keep looking?" The silence on her end stretched long enough that he probably thought she was going to say no. "I'll need access to your internal financial records," he said, "going back 15 years. Not through the legal department, direct access, administrator level, and I need to know that no one else in the company is told I'm doing this." "Done. What else?" "This is going to sound strange. Tell me. I'll need to bring my son with me on Saturday. His school is closed and I don't have childcare until Monday. He's 8. He'll sit in a corner and do a puzzle. He's very quiet when he wants to be." Vivian blinked. "Your son, he's 8. He'll sit in a corner. You can bring your son," she said. A breath. "Yeah, okay, I'll be there." The next 4 days were the longest Vivian Ashworth could remember in years. And her life had not exactly been short on long days. She moved carefully. That was the hardest part. The deliberate slowness, the need to act normal in a building where she could no longer look at Brennan Aldridge without every conversation they had ever had rearranging itself into something else. She sat across from him in a Tuesday operations meeting and listened to him talk about Q4 projections, and nodded at the appropriate moments. Afterward, when everyone else had filed out, he came to her. "The Harbor Line team is getting nervous," he said, sitting down in the way he sometimes did, easy, unhurried, the posture of a man who was comfortable in this room and wanted her to feel it. "They've got commitments riding on this. If we wait much longer, they may look for other partners." "Let them look," she said. He studied her. "That's not like you." "People surprise themselves sometimes, Vivian." He leaned forward slightly. That contractor was out of line. What he did in the boardroom was, he raised concerns that nobody had raised before, she said. And then he showed me how serious he thought they were. She kept her voice neutral. "I'd call that within the line, actually." Something flickered behind Aldridge's eyes. Just a small thing. He recovered it quickly. "I'm going to go back through some of the older corporate records," she said. "Historical. I want to understand the company's full financial architecture before I sign anything this significant. Of course, anything you need, I can pull together. I'd like to do it with Renata," she said. Directly, a very brief pause. "Of course, whatever you need." She looked at him across the table. 14 years is a long time, she said. "It is," he smiled. "Doesn't feel that long." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." Saturday morning, Daniel arrived at 8:47 with a boy in a green hoodie that had a cartoon dinosaur on the front and a backpack that appeared to contain an entire Lego set. Security called up. Vivian told them to let him through. She met them on the 35th floor. Caleb Marsh looked up at her with the frank, unfiltered assessment of a child who hadn't yet learned to hide the fact that he was evaluating you. "You're the billionaire," he said. Daniel's voice was the specific, patient weariness of someone who had stopped being embarrassed by this. "I'm the CEO, Vivian said. "It's a job title like a doctor or a teacher." Caleb considered this. "My teacher makes really good paper airplanes. I don't make paper airplanes," Vivian said. "Are you bad at crafts?" "Pretty bad." He nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked around the office. "Can I sit by the window?" "You can sit wherever you want," she said. He went immediately to the window, sat cross-legged on the floor, and began pulling Lego pieces from his backpack with the focused intensity of someone who had a project and no intention of being distracted from it. Daniel watched him for a moment, then looked at Vivian. "Sorry about." "Don't be." She looked at the kid already deep in construction. "He's fine. Come look at what I pulled." They worked for 6 hours. Daniel went through financial records from 2010 to 2019. With the methodical attention of someone who had done this for a living and hadn't forgotten how, Vivian worked alongside him, asking questions, pulling documents on the parallel terminal. Somewhere in the second hour, they stopped being a CEO and a contractor and became something more like two people who were very angry about the same thing and had decided, without formally deciding, to address it together. What they found was not explosive at first. It was small, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking, and designed to be missed, a series of internal fund transfers from 2013 and 2014, amounts just below the threshold that triggered automatic review. A vendor contract from 2015 for consulting services. The vendor name different from anything in Daniel's documents, but the registered agent address was the same Tortola law firm. A board resolution from 2016 authorizing Aldridge to approve expenditures up to $10 million without additional board sign-off. Passed at a meeting where 2 of 5 board members were absent. He was expanding his own authority, Daniel said quietly. One piece at a time, over 15 years, Vivian said, patient, slow, the kind of operation where you know you're going to be in the building for a long time so you don't rush. The deal, she said. Harborline, if we'd signed it, what actually happens? He had been building toward this. She could tell by how his notes had organized themselves over the last hour. Tybee Shoreline Holdings is the ultimate beneficial owner of a significant stake in Harborline Freight Solutions, he said. Once you pay $48 million into that deal, a percentage flows through the ownership structure. Some of it goes to legitimate operational costs. Some of it gets processed through Meridian Ridge in the Caymans, and then a secondary clause on page 912 of the contract, the one about licensing rights. That clause gives the counterparty co-signing authority on Pinnacle System's logistics agreements for the next 12 years. He'd control the logistics arm through a shell company. Nobody could trace back to him, Vivian said. Without ever showing up as an officer or director, he looked at her, elegant, in a terrible way. 15 years, she said again. Maybe more. The network was already there when he arrived. He may have been building this before he ever walked through your door. He used my company. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite anger yet. He used my father's company first. He helped push my father out, and then he stayed in the building and used what was left. That's what it looks like. That's what it is, she said. She wasn't interested in softer language. She stood and walked to the window. Caleb had built something substantial. It had towers and what appeared to be a suspension bridge. He was studying it with the expression of someone considering revisions. What do we still need? She said. A direct connection between Aldridge and Tybee Shoreline Holdings, something that puts him in the ownership chain. Right now we have strong circumstantial evidence, and your father's testimony. We need something that links him personally. Where would we find it? If it exists, it's probably not in your records. He would have kept his own exposure out of anything you could access. It might be in the federal case files from 2011. The investigation that was closed. I know someone who might be able to pull those. From the window, Caleb said without looking up, Dad, I'm hungry. In a bit, but is there food here? Vivian looked at the kid. There's a kitchen on this floor, probably granola bars and crackers. Caleb looked at her. Are you hungry? She realized she hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. Actually, yeah, Dad never eats when he's working, Caleb said, returning to his construction. You have to make him. Daniel looked briefly embarrassed in the specific way of someone who has just been accurately described by someone half their height. We should eat, Vivian said, standing. Your son is right, he usually is, Daniel said, and closed the laptop. They ate crackers and granola bars in the 35th floor kitchen, while Caleb sat on the counter and explained at considerable length the structural logic of what he was building, which turned out to be an underwater research station with a surface module. A design he acknowledged was scientifically speculative, but architecturally necessary. Vivian listened to him explain why the central support columns needed to be wider at the base. And somewhere in the middle of it, she thought, I used to be that certain about things, before I learned what certainty costs. By 4 in the afternoon, Daniel had sent a message to his contact in the federal records system. A woman named Agent Clara Whitfield, who had been lead investigator on the 2011 case before it was closed, and who, according to Daniel, had never stopped being angry about the way it had ended. By 5, Vivian's assistant Renata had quietly scanned and digitized 14 years of board meeting minutes. By 6:30, Caleb had fallen asleep on the floor next to his construction, his green hoodie balled up under his head, and at 6:52 Daniel went very still. Then he said quietly, "Vivian, come look at this." She came around the desk. He pointed at the screen. Vendor 8D, Tybee Shoreline Holdings, BVI, approved for operational consulting services, fiscal years 2016 through 2019. He put them in your approved vendor list, she said. 3 years before the Harborline deal, he was already running money through them. She stared at the screen. She looked at the COO's name in a board resolution he had helped draft, authorizing payments to a shell company he controlled, and she felt something go cold and very quiet inside her. Not grief exactly, and not rage either. Something that was going to become one or the other later, when there was time for it. Not yet, there was still work to do. Clara Whitfield called Daniel on Monday morning while he was in the school drop-off line. "I pulled the Tybee Shoreline registration," she said without preamble. "You're right that the Tortola connection exists. It's not in the public file, but I have it in the working documents from 2011. And here's what I found that isn't public. Tybee Shoreline's nominee directorship ran through a firm called Breton Administrative Services. Breton's beneficial service agreement holder is the Tortola law firm, same office, the 2011 federal account. And Tybee Shoreline both ran through that administrative firm." She paused. "It's not a smoking gun alone. But the account number from 2011 appears in one other place in our working documents, in a voluntary disclosure submitted by Pinnacle Coastal's COO office in December of 2011, 1 month before the case closed." Daniel was standing outside his car, with the engine running. "He disclosed his own account," Daniel said. "As a suspicious account, as one of many. Buried in a long list, you hand investigators your own fingerprints, alongside 100 other fingerprints, and they can't distinguish signal from noise, especially when the case is already under resource pressure. And then the case closed 2 weeks later." Whitfield said. "She let that sit. The account still exists," she said. "If it received wire transfers from Pinnacle Coastal vendor payments in the last decade, we have a direct link between Aldridge and Tybee Shoreline. But to get those transfer records, I need a formal case. I need someone to officially open one." "I know someone," Daniel said. The memo Daniel sent to federal prosecutor James Okafor in Charlotte took him 3 days to write, and 48 hours of revision with Vivian reading alongside him, catching the places where he overstated, correcting a timeline error in Section 3, fixing a sentence in the conclusion that read as accusation rather than evidence. Okafor called Whitfield within 4 hours of receiving the file. "That's the cleanest preliminary case file I've seen in 2 years, he told her. He was opening a formal inquiry. The BVI account records came back within 10 days, 17 wire transfers from Pinnacle Coastal vendor accounts between 2016 and 2023. Total amount, $4. $7 million, and the beneficial owner listed on the Know Your Customer documentation held by the originating bank was Gerald Brennan Aldridge, with a home address in Wrightsville Beach. He didn't even hide his name at the account level." Vivian said when Daniel told her, "BVI banking secrecy is strong," Daniel said. He calculated that no federal case would ever be opened, because the 2011 investigation had already been closed. And the 2011 investigation had been closed because of pressure he had helped generate. He wasn't wrong about the logic. He just didn't account for someone reading the fine print on a $48 million contract. Okafor timed the arrest carefully. He needed Aldridge inside the building, confident, unsuspecting. He needed the board assembled. He needed Vivian to hold the line for 2 more weeks, sitting across from Aldridge in meetings, and answering his questions and letting him believe the deal might still close. She did it. She didn't do it easily. But she did it every day for 2 weeks, because she had decided that knowing the truth was worth whatever it cost. And she had made that decision, without hesitation, the moment Daniel had asked her. On the morning of the arrest, Daniel dropped Caleb at school at 7:38. Caleb got out of the car, then turned back. "Dad, yeah, you're wearing your good shirt. Meeting. Is it the important one?" "Yeah, bud." Caleb thought about this. "Is it the CEO?" Daniel looked at him. "Yeah, good luck." And then he ran toward the entrance without looking back. Daniel drove to the building. Okafor's team was already in position. 2 unmarked vehicles, 1 agent in the lobby, 1 near the elevator bank. Daniel texted Okafor's contact number when he came through the doors. 1 word came back, ready. Vivian was in her office on 35. Standing when he arrived, she sat when she was working, stood when she was waiting. The difference was something he had learned without trying to learn it. "Board is convening at 9, she said. "I told them it was a strategic update. Brennan came in at 7:20, earlier than usual. He knows something's wrong. He doesn't know what. But he moves differently when he's careful." "Okafor's team will wait until the board presentation is done," Daniel said. "They don't want the arrest to disrupt what you're about to say." She nodded. She picked up her folder. The presentation they had built together, 61 pages, organized the way Daniel had taught her. One thing flowing into the next, evidence before conclusion, facts before meaning. She looked at him. "Ready? Are you?" "No," she said, "but I was never going to be ready. Might as well be now." She walked out of the office. The board meeting started at 9 with 7 members present. Aldridge sat in his usual seat, 2 down from Vivian's right, laptop open, coffee in front of him, silver-haired and composed. The easy practiced calm of someone who had been in boardrooms, long enough to feel at home in all of them. He looked at Daniel when Daniel came in and sat in a chair along the wall. Something moved behind his eyes, an assessment being updated. Daniel looked back at him steadily, not with satisfaction, just steadily, seeing him clearly for the first time. Without the partial information that had preceded this moment, Aldridge looked away first. Vivian stood at the head of the table. She didn't open with anything soft. "I'm going to tell you what I found," she said. "I'd ask everyone to let me finish before asking questions. The full picture is what matters here, not any single piece of it." She talked for 42 minutes. Every document, every transfer record, every shell company, every corporate approval. She presented Okafor's findings on the BVI account. She presented the 17 wire transfers, the $4, $7 million, the beneficial owner registration with Brennan Aldridge's name and his Wrightsville Beach address. She presented the 2011 federal investigation, the voluntary disclosure, and what her father had told her about who had managed the cooperation process. She presented the pattern. Blue Star Capital, the dissolution. Tybee Shoreline, registered 1 year later, the same registered agent. She did all of it in the precise, sequential, unemotional voice of someone who had decided that the truth didn't need her feelings to be devastating. The truth was enough on its own. She just had to carry it across the room. At some point in the first 10 minutes, Warren Finley stopped looking skeptical and started looking pale. At some point in the second 10 minutes, 2 other board members had stopped taking notes and were simply watching her with an expression Daniel recognized. The expression of people realizing that the ground beneath something they trusted had been different from what they believed, and that the difference had been invisible for a very long time. Throughout all of it, Brennan Aldridge sat in his chair. He was still, not dramatically still, not the stillness of a man bracing for impact, more the stillness of someone running calculations in real time, adjusting variables, looking for the version of this moment that still had a way out. His laptop was open. He didn't interrupt. He didn't object. He reached for his coffee once and then didn't pick it up. When Vivian reached the final slide, she looked up from the presentation and looked directly at Aldridge. The room was very quiet. "Brennan," she said. Her voice had changed, just slightly. The flatness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Not anger and not grief either. Something that had been compressed into this single moment after weeks of carrying it. "I trusted you. My father trusted you. You used that trust to steal from us, to help destroy him, and you continued it for 15 years, while sitting at the same table I thought meant something to both of us." She paused. "I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself. I don't need you to. I just wanted you to know I understand exactly what you did, to your face." The room was completely silent. Aldridge looked at her. For a moment, the mask slipped, not entirely. The man was too controlled for that, but the layer of practiced ease, the warmth, the professional confidence that had been calibrated for exactly these rooms and exactly these moments, it slipped just enough to show something underneath it. Something harder to look at because it was real. He started to speak. A word. Maybe the beginning of a sentence. It didn't form. Then the door opened. Okafor came in with 2 agents. They didn't rush. They walked to where Aldridge was sitting with the professional economy of people who had done this before and understood that the moment had its own gravity without any help from them. "Gerald Brennan Aldridge," Okafor said. "You're under arrest for federal wire fraud, 17 counts." He set the document on the table. "You have the right to remain silent." Aldridge stood. He straightened his jacket first, actually straightened his jacket, the automatic reflex of a man who had spent 58 years managing how he appeared. Then he put his hands out in front of him. "I want my attorney," he said. "Of course," Okafor said. They walked him out. The door closed with an ordinary click that was somehow the loudest sound in the room. No one spoke for a long moment. Warren Finley had both hands flat on the table. Staring at the door, Vivian looked around the table at every board member, one by one. "I know this is a great deal to absorb," she said. "I also know that in the next 24 hours, there will be questions from investors, from the press, from everyone in this building, who deserves to know what happened and what we're going to do next. So I want to tell you what I've already decided." She paused. "We cooperate fully with the federal investigation. We open every record. We bring in outside counsel to review the full scope of the vendor relationships. We are transparent with our investors and our employees, and we rebuild." She paused again. "This company has been rebuilt from worse. I know how to do it. I need to know the board is with me." Silence. Then Carol Nance, usually the quietest person in the room, said, "I'm with you." One by one, the others followed. Warren Finley last, but he followed. "Thank you," Vivian said. She meant it without ceremony. Richard Sterling's analog walked through the lobby at 10:23. Daniel was waiting near the elevator. When Charles Ashworth came through the glass doors, he moved carefully, the specific carefulness of someone who had learned at 62 that the world was more fragile than he had once believed. "Is it done?" Charles asked. "He was arrested about 45 minutes ago," Daniel said. "Your daughter is with the board." Charles nodded slowly. His jaw moved like he was processing something large through a very small space. "She told me what you said on your way out of that boardroom," he said. "That you didn't think the 2011 investigation ended the way it was supposed to. I said it before I knew how right it was. You said it anyway." A long quiet. "Thank you," Charles said. "You don't need to. I know I don't need to. That's why I'm doing it." The elevator came. They rode up in the silence of two men who didn't have much else to say and didn't need to fill the space. The doors opened on 35. Vivian was in the hall. She saw her father, and for a moment the CEO disappeared entirely. Just a daughter in a hallway, looking at a man she had been fighting for without ever saying out loud that that was what she was doing. Charles opened his arms. She walked into them. Daniel stepped out of the elevator and moved to give them the hall. He went to the window at the far end, the one that looked out toward downtown and the hills past it, and he stood there with his hands in his pockets, while behind him something private and necessary happened between two people who had needed this morning to arrive for a very long time. His phone buzzed. A text from school. "Hi, Mr. Marsh, just confirming pickup today at 3:45. He typed back, confirmed, "I'll be there." He looked at the city for a moment longer. Then he turned around and walked back toward the rest of the day. Harborline Freight Solutions collapsed within 6 weeks of the arrest. Okafor's investigation revealed that the two executives who had flown in for the signing were directly connected to Tybee Holdings through a network of subsidiary accounts. They had not been innocent logistics partners. They had been the other side of a 15-year extraction plan, waiting for the moment Aldridge could close the deal. Aldridge, facing 17 counts of federal wire fraud and RICO exposure, did what Whitfield had predicted. His lawyer negotiated a cooperation agreement, 7 counts in exchange for full disclosure on the network, full testimony on what had happened in 2011, the voluntary disclosure, the buried account, the coordination that had closed the investigation before it reached the truth. In a federal courtroom in Charlotte on a cold morning in February, Brennan Aldridge took the stand and stated under oath, for the record, what he had done. He described how he had entered Charles Ashworth's company as a planted operative, how he had maneuvered the COO who preceded him out of his position, how he had managed the cooperation with federal investigators in a way that protected himself and dissolved the inquiry, how he had spent 14 years building authority inside Pinnacle Coastal, while simultaneously building a parallel financial structure designed to extract the company's value at the moment of maximum return. He testified clearly. He answered every question. He did not break down. He did not appear remorseful in any way that was visible to the people watching. What he appeared was tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and no longer has a reason to keep carrying it, and is not sure whether the relief of setting it down is better or worse than the weight had been. The judge sentenced him to 11 years. Charles Ashworth's attorney filed the supporting documentation the same week. A supplemental entry was added to the 2011 federal case record. It was not on the front page of anything. The correction of a quiet injustice is not news the way the injustice was. But for Charles Ashworth, sitting in the coffee shop near his house, the morning his attorney called, the morning he heard the words, "The record has been corrected," officially, the morning he understood that what he had experienced for 11 years as his own failure had been a crime committed against him by someone he trusted. For Charles Ashworth, that phone call was its own kind of front page. He walked to the park near his house afterward and sat on a bench by the pond for a long time. His daughter called him at noon. "Are you okay?" she asked. He watched a pair of ducks cross the far edge of the water. "I'm going to dinner with Raymond tonight," he said. "The old board member. We're going to the place on Glenwood we used to go to in the late 90s. She was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly the right thing to do," she said. "I thought so too." The Lego space station was still on the 35th floor windowsill. 6 weeks later, Vivian had told Renata not to touch it. Nobody touched it. Daniel noticed it when he came in for his first formal retainer review on a Tuesday morning in January. Vivian had offered him a consulting arrangement after the arrest. Reasonable terms, compliance review on significant transactions before execution, his own hours, work from home unless specifically needed. He had said yes, after thinking about it, for less than a minute. "You've seen that before, haven't you?" he said, looking at the Lego structure. "The same thing you thought about in that boardroom. Money moving fast. Nobody asking to slow it down. Everybody, too, invested in the yes to hear the no." She was looking at the harbor through the window. The January light low and silver. "Yes," she said, "and you did it anyway. Rebuilt from inside something that was already compromised." "I didn't know the full scope," she said. "No. But you kept going in every day. That takes a certain kind of stubbornness." She turned to look at him. "You tore a $48 million contract in a room full of board members who thought you were nobody. That's a different kind of stubbornness." She almost smiled. "It is." They sat for a moment with the contracts between them, both of them clean. No unusual structures, no registered agents in Tortola, no shell companies with names that pointed back to something buried. "Boring," Daniel said. "I know." She looked at the documents. "It's beautiful." He looked at her and she looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and through the window the city went on, ordinary and continuous, carrying on with no particular awareness that two people in a building on Fayetteville Street had, in the space of 3 weeks, pulled a thread that unraveled 15 years of a very patient lie, and had done it quietly, with documents and late nights, and a child's Lego construction on a windowsill. On a Sunday afternoon in late March, one of those southern spring days where the warmth is real, and the light has a different quality than it did in January, Daniel drove to Pullen Park with Caleb. They walked the paths along the lake. Caleb was eating an ice cream that was melting faster than he could manage it, which he was handling with a combination of strategy and resignation. "Dad," Caleb said. "Yeah, is the important job done?" "The main part of it. Are you going to keep working for her?" For a while, as a consultant, Caleb thought about this. "Is she nice?" Daniel thought about how to answer that honestly. "She's direct," he said. "She works hard. She says what she thinks, and she expects other people to do the same." He looked at the water. "Yeah, she's nice." She remembered the space station. Caleb said, "That's a good sign it is." They walked. The lake did what lakes do. After a while, Caleb said, "Dad, you look different this year. Like in November and December, you looked like you were working on something that actually mattered." "I do work that matters," Daniel said. "I know, but this was different." Caleb looked up at him. "You looked like yourself, like the full version." Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. He thought about November, about the gas station coffee, and the manila folder and the boardroom, about Whitfield's voice on the phone, and Okafor's fluorescent light, and Charles Ashworth on a bench by a pond, about Vivian in a dozen different configurations, reading documents at midnight, listening to an 8-year-old explain structural engineering, walking into a boardroom on the morning of an arrest with 61 pages and nothing left to hide. He thought about what it meant to find something that mattered and not look away from it. He thought about the window he had finally fixed, the crooked cabinet door he had finally adjusted. He thought about his son, standing at the bottom of the stairs at 6 in the morning saying, "You didn't sleep. Your eyes are red." "You might be right," Daniel said. "I usually am," Caleb said. They walked to the edge of the lake and stood looking at the water. The afternoon sun came down through the new leaves and made patterns on the surface that didn't stay in one place long enough to be named. Caleb finished his ice cream. He looked at the water. Then he looked up at his father. What happens next? It was a child's question. It was also the only question. Daniel looked at the lake and thought that the honest answer was that he didn't know, and that not knowing was not a failure of anything, just the real condition of being alive and still in the middle of things. "Not sure," he said. "Something." Caleb seemed to find this acceptable. He reached up and took his father's hand the way he still did sometimes, less often than a year ago. More than he probably would next year, they stood at the edge of the water, while the spring sun moved and the lake stayed the same. And the city went on doing what cities do. Not everything that had been broken was fixed. That was not how these things worked. There were things Daniel still carried that he would carry. For a long time, there were years Charles Ashworth couldn't recover and losses that predated all of it. There were truths that had arrived too late to undo the damage they might have prevented. But the lie had been named. The persons responsible was answering for it. The record had been corrected. The company would survive. The small, good things were still happening. An 8-year-old's hand in his, the lake in the March light, the ordinary ongoing fact of a life that had continued past the worst of itself and come out somewhere worth being. It wasn't a clean ending, but it was a true one, and Daniel Marsh, who had walked into a boardroom 6 months ago with gas station coffee and grape jelly on his sleeve, and no plan beyond saying what he had found, Daniel Marsh was fine with that. He had learned a long time ago that clean endings were mostly fiction. The true ones were better anyway. Sometimes the people the world treats as invisible are the ones who see most clearly. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in any room is not the money on the table, but one quiet person who actually read the fine print. Brennan Aldridge had 15 years and 48 million reasons to believe no one would ever look closely enough. He forgot to account for a man who couldn't look away from something that mattered. Dignity isn't given, it's recognized, and the people who spend their lives stealing from others always assume that what they've built will last longer than what was taken. It never does. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to discover who they really were? Share your story below, and if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hidden depths, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.